Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think, and Fleta mentioned this before, is that the TGA, the framework of the TGA is incredibly important for our reputation. You know, pretty important for safety and quality of products for Australian patients and doctors, but equally important for international markets. And you know, the ability, you know, the discipline, the framework, the transparency of what's required. You know, we're providing a medicine under a regulatory framework. It's very clear what we need to do. That discipline, those controls, those, you know, the commitment to quality and safety stands us in good stead when we talk to a number of international markets, and the mutual recognition around the TGA in, you know, certainly in the UK and in parts of Europe, you know, it's a pretty important badge of, you know, sort of stamp of approval that if you're compliant with what the TGA expects from you, then, you know, it makes it easier when we go through some of the discussions, particularly regional regulatory authorities in, you know, parts of Germany and things like that. So I think that, you know, our regulatory framework, while we certainly, you know, sometimes we find it a bit difficult. It's, you know, it's no different for anybody else who's producing a medicine. So we've just got to shrug our shoulders and get on with it, you know, and doing it well and doing it properly helps us enormously around the world.
Shane, I think that highlights a really good point, because the TGA, as a producer, we're required to produce to these extremely high standards with rigorous testing. You know, the investment and the cost that is associated with being able to produce this medicine, that the TGA have this tick of approval, which gives us the ability to import, to export to other countries. However, where there's a huge gap is that there are a number of products being imported into Australia which don't have to undergo the same stringent requirements as local producers. So, and I think, look, the TGA are the first company or organisation to say, look, we agree, we know, we recognise this, and it makes sense as to why and how that happened, because back in 2016 or 17, when the demand in society for medicinal cannabis in Australia was there, we didn't have the local produce or supply, so we did need to import it. But they don't undergo the same testing or auditing that the TGA does with local producers. So a bit of a discrepancy there, and I think, you know, it's coming to fruition now, and I'm excited to see where this goes, just to make sure everybody is literally playing on a level playing field.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, you're 100% right, is that we all know now how long it takes us to get through the testing, through the stability, to have sufficient shelf life on product to make it available. But we're, you know, a number of us are there now. So all we ask for is that we're held to the same lens. You know, we're not asking for a leg up. We're not asking for any preferential treatment. Just one set of rules for everybody's great.
Yeah, because to have that cost associated, just for viewers to understand, the Australian local producers are competing on price. Now, when you have a pharmacovigilance quality system set up, which you need to when you're manufacturing a pharmaceutical product, the time investment, the resources, and just the cost associated with all of this, it adds onto the end product price for patients. And yet we're having to compete with imported products that don't have any of this system. Some of them are not even manufactured in GMP facilities. And so the pricing is very low, and we can't necessarily compete with that in Australia unless we're looking at a loss, just because of the costs that the TGA require us to go through. It's a really important point to recognise.
Yeah. Can I ask Fleta, because yeah, 100%. I agree with you. And I'm also very excited that the TGA is making moves towards closing that imbalance, which I think is appropriate to do. Will that have? Do you think that will have an impact on average product pricing? Because I mean, at the moment, for example, you know, your organisation, Little Green Pharma, you know, you're making these products to those high quality standards. You know, you do incur those really high costs, you know, with doing that, and yet you still manage to compete on price with with some of the lower regulated, less regulated imported products. Is that how would that sort of change things, do you think, if that change happened next year?
Yeah, look, I mean, the prices will continue to come down, even in Australia. As we grow, economies of scale, etc., pricing will come down. But what we're unable to do is, how low can you go? And if it's a price war between some of the larger Canadian companies that are producing at a lot less, what's the average production cost per gram? It's $2 something Canadian, even less. And you look at the Colombian and what have you, and they're down to 20 cents. So, it's very hard for Australian produce, particularly if you're growing indoor for certain markets, such as Germany, which requires you to grow indoor for flower products. So the end market is very important in this discussion, because knowing where your medicine is going to end up, it completely depends on, where your raw material comes from. Is it indoor, greenhouse, outdoor, etc.? But coming back to the pricing, look, I think there are some groups that have the costs so low that they can just keep going lower and lower and lower. And eventually, how low do they go before it bastardizes the industry and the Australian producers are left going, we can't go any lower because our costs, these are our costs. So it's good timing. I think there's a little way to go just in terms of Australian producers. We're still getting our processes and systems refined. We're still learning. We're still improving. We're identifying where value can be created along the value chain. And so prices will continue to come down. How much, I don't know. And sometimes I have to wonder, can we compete with some of the lower cost producers where their product is being imported?
Would it be fair to say, though, initially when imported products were allowed into Australia early in the piece, Greg Hunt allowed imported biomass and imported manufactured product into Australia, was really to cover the shortfall while cultivation was picking up. And the whole proposal really to cease that over time and not allow imported product once Australia could support itself. Obviously, a lot of business models have now evolved around imported product and relying on biomass to supply their production capability and providing medicines. What's the view for the cultivators and producers in relation to the end of that, the termination of that importing law? Will it happen, or is the market too reliant now on imported biomass? Or what's the view from the cultivators?
I don't think that the government has ever said that it would prohibit imports of any quality standard necessarily, and that's not what they look like they will be proposing soon either. That would be quite out of character for Australia, as to engage in sort of true protectionist policies. But I think what is reasonable probably is for them to require any products that are imported into Australia to meet the same quality standards as a product that is manufactured in Australia. And the effect of that will be that many imports will not be compliant. There will still be GMP compliant products made overseas, Canada, wherever, and exported to Australia and prescribed to Australian patients. And that's not going to change, I don't think. But I mean, what do people think about that?
No, I would agree. I think the imports will continue to come in. All we're asking for is them to be fully compliant. And we know early on when we were talking to Canadian producers about what we required from them in terms of getting product that was compliant with the Australian regulations, is that they would complain that adds a lot of cost to each bottle that we produce. And we go, yeah, it does. Yeah, that's just a cost of doing business. So I think we will see a bit of a leveling up. I think to Sean's point and to Fleta's point is that when we're all moving towards operating at scale, and scale will allow us both in cultivation and also in manufacturing to, gain efficiency, improve margins, and also have a bit more price, ability to move on price and still be able to run profitable businesses.
And I guess the shorter your supply, I think probably one of the bigger costs that contributes to the price of cannabis medicines in Australia is not necessarily that it's super cheap to cultivate cannabis in Uruguay. It's the fact that it's a super long supply chain between wherever it's grown and wherever it's consumed. And if you've got 4 or 5 organizations, conducting different parts of that business activity, very quickly that sort of, adds up. And then of course, everyone's got to make a profit, along the way. Otherwise, why would you be doing business? So the shorter we can have our supply chains, like the more locally we can cultivate and manufacture, the better chance we have of having more affordable product, even more affordable than some of the lower regulated imports potentially. But, we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of research going on. We really are quite a hotbed of clinical research. But not only that, we've got a lot of preclinical work going on at different universities. So at the moment, we're up to around 70 patient studies that have either been announced or are in progress or recently completed. And of these, there's about 52 that are listed on the Australian Register of Clinical Trials with ethics approval. So that means they're going to go ahead, which is awesome. So we also have about 10 studies where we're looking at synthetic cannabinoids. I tend to like to look at the whole plant-derived cannabis medicines myself. 21 non-commercial research groups, which are kind of university-led, and then about 29 commercial research groups. And when we say commercial research groups, we're basically talking about product companies who are putting their products through trials. A lot of these at the moment are more kind of centred around using healthy individuals and getting PK data and proof of concept, making sure we don't have any adverse effects and that kind of thing before moving into an actual clinical trial, looking at the condition itself. But yeah, there's a lot going on, which is super exciting. So as you were saying, looking at how these results may be able to be interpreted for products, well, that will be mostly your commercial groups doing their research, because a lot of the non-commercial groups don't tend to state what their product is. It's more of a concept around cannabidiol for epilepsy, cannabidiol for anxiety, but you won't see what that product is. So I guess it is then up to a product company to say, okay, well, I've got a 100 milligram per mil cannabidiol product. These results have been seen in the university trial, say Lambert Initiative or another group. I'll put this through a trial for commercial use and for my own product, and then I can actually look at registering my product on the Australian Registry of products. That's the only way that we'll see these products available on the PBS, which is the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. And once again, that will make it cheap for patients. So I think that is probably the long road, big picture. That's what we'd really like to see with all of these products.
I think there's a lot of investment capital starting to look at the R&D side, or the piece of the value chain, in relation to, there's a massive prize there if you can, undertake the research and patent it and own that drug or own that label claim as per Epidiolex, GW Pharma's product, and ultimately get that reimbursement model working, whether it be through a government body like a PBS or a Medicare, or else insurers or Veteran Affairs or whoever it might be, depending on the indication. But if you're getting a sort of a 90% plus rebate on or a reimbursement on a label claim medicine, you certainly can claim that little piece of the market. And I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in regards to those label claims and R&D. If you are in the research and development sort of game, do you go for a very large label claim for a very large population, a chronic pain, which would, a phase 3 study would involve many, many, many patients? Or do you have a very, very narrow claim and then sort of broaden that claim over time? So you might target over 70-year-old patients, female patients with chronic pain who have a history of breast cancer. It's a very narrow market. It would require a lower cost study and fewer patients to actually get that label claim. Once you have that label claim and you can patent it, you can then expand. It's a classic, a classic large pharma type model in regards to how you own that piece of the market. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But certainly from the investment capital side, money, your capital, institutional money, retail money is now looking at that R&D piece. And who are the companies to back? Which horses do you back?
I was just going to say it is a really difficult one, and really the only real company that has done these kind of really intense random controlled trials has been GW Pharma, and but they've been using more of the isolated product, haven't they? Like pure CBD and Sativex isn't, but we really probably do have to follow these models and follow what companies like GW Pharma are doing.
Yeah.